Well, good evening and welcome. I'm Alec Hogg with your BizNews Briefing. We got some really interesting news coming through today. I had a chance to have a conversation with Bernard Kruger. He's one of the senior managers at South African Revenue Services. And this on the announcement that came through earlier in the week. SARS is going to crack down hard on those who've been playing in cryptos, Bitcoin, etc. If you've been making money there, you better be sure that you've disclosed it, although the chances are 90% that you haven't, because that, Mr. Kruger says, is their findings. We'll find out a lot more about that. If you've had any interest in the cryptocurrency market, best you listen. That's coming up right at the end of the show. Ahead of that, though, we're going to be talking politics. We're talking about the latest news today. Equites, the property company that has warehousing, brought its financial results out. We're talking to the chief executive of that company. And we've got a new market commentator today. His name is Cornelius Zeeman. I was very impressed. He's with Fairtree, one of the top performing asset managers in South Africa, but one that has been floating a little below the radar. They handle about 150 billion rand in assets, 40% of which is handled on behalf of foreign investors. So he gave us some really good insights. All of these interviews, by the way, you'll be able to pick up on BizNews TV in their entirety, but we give you the highlights tonight. It's big news coming out of the United States today. It hasn't really moved our markets much. We're slightly in the green. Is that the inflation rate in America is 2.4% for September. That lays the way for at least a quarter point interest rate cut again later this week when the US Federal Reserve gets together. In South Africa, though, it's a lot of news on the front of the political side. By-election result coming out today shows that a smaller party doesn't generally do well when it's in a coalition. And the Democratic Alliance, for the first time in absolute ages, lost a by-election. It lost a by-election in the Northern Cape, but worse than that, it lost it to the ANC. The ANC held on to 3 of the 4 by-elections, three of the 4 wards, and then 1 award away from the DA. Yesterday, when I spoke with Helen Ziller, she pointed out in some detail that the smaller parties have really got to play their cards well if they're going to go into a coalition and come out of it unscathed. She used numerous examples from around the world. But the DA is betting in South Africa that its high-performing cabinet ministers will be able to reflect on a good performance come the next national election. We shall see. But so far, it's like the ANC are the ones who've gone back into favor. Well, certainly someone who is not in favor with the Democratic Alliance, but not that it bothers him terribly much, is Mr. Herman Mashaba. Mashaba is the founder and the leader of ActionSA. My colleague Chris Dane got hold of him today to talk about the new mayor of Tshwane. This is what Herman had to say.
That in the 3 years, I was the mayor of the city of Johannesburg. Not a single time any EFF person has ever come and asked me for a tender, because I don't work with the tenders even when I was the mayor, not once. And I was accused on many occasions, but ultimately the truth came out, including the previous public protector actually entering the space. But fortunately enough, I've been cleared by the high courts in the land, because I took those matters on review. And I can tell you with Dr. Moya, that's something that she knows me and my determination to really fight corruption. Because if we're not going to fight corruption, this country is not going to really move forward. So what the DA is saying is just really the fear-mongering. DA, unfortunately, the mistake that they're making is to think that they are the only people who govern and they must govern on their own. If they want to govern, we live in a democratic country. Let them go out and get the support. I mean, how much money they've used the last 2 months to tarnish my name, tarnish other people's names and our political parties. I don't, you said to myself, is that how people negotiate? They negotiate like we live in a one party state under military rule. No, we're in a democratic environment where we have the right under our constitution to protect ourselves. So yeah, well, I think they can say whatever they want to say. It is their right. Insulting us, including yesterday actually. Saying that our mayor is going to just be a token mayor. Well, time will tell. So I don't think it is really necessary sometimes even respond to issues like this. One thing for sure I've learned in life is to listen to people, but ultimately judge them about what they do. So give us something to residents of the city of Tshwane. Give us the chance, just watch us very closely, hold us accountable, and we are going to do everything possible to make sure that we turn that city around. And I think this time around, having the ANC at the provincial and national behind this will make it much easier. Unlike when I was the mayor, you can imagine I had the ANC against me at the provincial and national level. So in this particular case, we are going to take advantage of this relationship to build one united South Africa, provide services to all the residents. The little budget that we've got, we will want the residents to hold us accountable.
Well, Herman, you certainly are going to be held accountable. And the ActionSA share of the vote in, after the 2021 November election halved to the national election held in May this year. So there's a lot on the line in Tshwane. Cornelius Zeeman is a portfolio manager at Fairtree. He's been there for 10 years. He's watched the business grow. He was telling me in the interview today from managing about 20 billion Rand, which is a relatively small business in the context of South African asset managers, to one that manages about 150 billion Rand. And as the market commentator, I said to him, did he have any views on the two SENS announcements that were worth picking up on today? The one was a property company Attack, which had an investor day, and secondly on Equites. Well, we started off by discussing exactly what goes on at an investor day and whether or not he and the Fairtree team attend them.
Yes, we definitely do site visits and we attend these investor days. We're not attending the specific one at Waterfall, but I see there is a YouTube broadcast, so people on the street can actually also access. Obviously, we don't have access to any inside information when we attend these events, so we're not at a big informational advantage, but it is important to know and hear firsthand from management what their plans are. Waterfall is 70% of their asset base and I think 60% of the earnings. So it's a very important asset for them. I remember 7 or 8 years ago being taken around by management in a golf cart in Mall of Africa. Very impressive asset that they've built. And Attack reported very good results a month ago, and the share price has performed very well this year. I think they're up more than 45% year to date. The Equites result was rather mediocre, but as expected. So dividends was raised by, I think, 1.5%. So they're tracking in line with the full year guidance, which is also basically 1.5% of growth. Distributable earnings grew 5.4%. Their loan to value, so how much debt they have, that increased from 39% to 41%, but they still have a plan to bring that down to 38% at the end of the FY25 as they dispose some of their non-core assets. And their share price has also been performing well in line with SA Inc. So they're also up 17% or so since May. And their dividend guidance basically places them on, I think, a 9 or 9.5% dividend yield. which is quite attractive, but it's basically similar to what you can get on an ABSA bank, 9.5% or BTI, and those counters are much more liquid. So it depends on what type of exposure you want in the fund. We like to play in the larger caps. We've always, even when we were small, we were very vocal that we predominantly invest in large caps because we want to be nimble and change our mind when the facts change.
Well, Equites' chief executive, Andrea Taverna-Turisan, might be a little disappointed to hear what the Fairtree man has to say about the set of results. He was quite excited about them, and indeed more excited about the future.
We have never been busier than we are at the moment in South Africa. Now, whether that is a result of GNU or not, I can't definitively put my finger on it, because we started becoming extremely busy from about March this year. So even pre-election, we started noticing a big uptick. And I think, firstly, energy security occasioned the thought process of, is the building we in, is it meeting our needs? No, it isn't. Should we invest a substantial amount of money to create energy security in the building we're in? Or should we just take the plunge and go into the 21st century and do everything in one place? So I think we've noticed that kind of momentum in our favor, which started out of the energy supply constraint. And then I think the other part of it is that what you're seeing is more and more organizations that seem to be shooting the lights out, especially on the retail front. It's interesting also to see Amazon having coming into the local market in terms of the shop. And you know, you look at that and sort of the question I often get asked is, so are you excited about Amazon potentially taking up lots of space? I mean, I'm not saying I'm not excited about it, but Amazon are very good at what they do, and Amazon will have an ability to negotiate very hard with whoever becomes their landlord. And I'm not saying we will or anybody else will for that matter, but somebody will. But what Amazon bring to the party is open discourse that competition is going to hot up. And if we don't upgrade our operational efficiency, then we are going to be cleaned up by one of the greatest supply chain companies in the world. And that's what I find is going to be very interesting in the next sort of 24, 36 months, is how many organizations are going to grapple with that very idea and make the decision that they need to come into the 21st century by introducing the necessary technology to get their supply chain to a level of efficiency that makes them competitive in an open market. And that's what's exciting for Equites.
He touched on something there that we're going to be exploring in some more detail in a moment. South Africa has been moribund. There's been no economic growth in this country for the last decade and a half. And as a result, not too much fresh blood has been coming in from abroad. When international investors have got the whole world to choose from, why would they go to a country that isn't growing and indeed has got all kinds of obstacles to investing, as South Africa has had over the past decade and a half? But that has made it a lot easier for locals. And you heard there from Andrea that when Amazon gets going in South Africa, and you can already see the billboards near the airports and elsewhere in the major cities, it is going to bring a whole new level of efficiency to that side of the market. An area which hasn't been touched by that yet, and one that we're going to be looking at in some detail now, is mining. So let's pick up with Cornelius Zeeman on the results yesterday from Afrimat. You might recall that there was a good conversation with Andries van Heerden, the chief executive, despite the fact that the numbers were the worst ever for a 6-month period. In the country's 2-decade-long listing history, the share price just bounced back after a very small decline to begin with. And I asked Cornelius first to just give us some insight there and indeed have a look at the mining sector generally.
Yes, Andries and the team are very transparent. And we attended a conference just a couple of weeks ago where they made it clear that this was a very tough half. I must say the earnings announcement was even worse than I expected, but clearly the other people factored it into their estimates, and they're willing to look through a tough result because they understand the strategy at the company. The long-term mindset of Andries and the team has proven to work over time, and they're willing to make short-term sacrifices for long-term gains. So it looks like everything is picking up post this interim period, and the long-term prospects still remain good.
Andries is one of the stars of the Joburg Mining Indaba, which was held in the past week. Bernard Swanepoel, who hosts it, came out saying he feels a bit of sense of optimism at last for mining. How are you seeing South African miners' prospects?
There's definitely optimism across the board in South Africa when you speak to the corporates. We're not seeing green shoots in terms of activity levels picking up yet. In terms of mining specifically, I think South Africa is endowed with fantastic natural resources, but I think there is some environmental and other regulation and requirements which makes it a difficult place to operate in. And mining is a very long-term game. So you're sinking billions of rand of capex, and you'll only see the returns 5 and 10 years from now. So you need a lot of policy certainty when you make these decisions, and you're dealing with labor. Typically, thousands of people working, and dealing with labor unions can be difficult. So we haven't really seen many exploration taking place in South Africa, and also not many new greenfield projects. So that actually is a nice advantage for a company like Afrimat, which is smaller than the traditional miners, because there's a lot of resources that have been explored and where mining has started and operations have actually shut in the tough times, and they can pick up these assets on the cheap. So we see it in other companies too, like African Rainbow Minerals. We picked up a Coney platinum mine. We had our reservations about that, and we still think they overpaid for that and in the wrong part of the cycle. But there's a lot of assets that are sort of sitting on the shelves that other companies with stronger balance sheets and longer term horizons can pick up at good prices, hopefully, and earn good returns. But in terms of new investment, I'm not very optimistic that we're at a point of inflection there.
Well, he may well have been talking about our next guest, Mike Miller of Mantengu. Mantengu is a small chrome mine. It's got 2 chrome mine operations, one near Tabazimbi, one and the other one close by. And this is a company that today swallowed a whale. It is a platinum stroke chrome mine called Blue Ridge, previously owned and operated by Aquarius, then acquired by Sibanye when it bought Aquarius, but it's been in mothballs for 10 years. Now, Mike Miller and the team at Mantengu own 50% of this operation, and they've acquired it. The other 50% is with BEE shareholders. They've acquired it from the creditors who were owed more than 2 billion rand. And pretty much the creditors have written that off. I asked him what the chances were of some of those creditors who were just so important in the equation when you are a developing mining operation in South Africa actually supporting Mantengu into the future. It's an interesting interview. The full interview is on BizNews Radio and BizNews TV. But let's listen to this little highlight.
Mining largely happens in the rural space. It has massive capacity, potential in terms of job creation, wealth creation, conversion of marginalized land, etc. So mining was naturally the sector we picked up on to quite frankly prove that our funding model worked.
Some of those who have been involved in the past, I'm thinking specifically Industrial Development Corporation and the Development Bank of South Africa, might be feeling a little sore because they've had to take a fraction of what their loans, take back a fraction of what they actually lent out. Are they, though, behind you here when you get to that next stage of raising capital to get those 1,800 potentially people working at the mine again? What's the relationship with them, and has there been any signals of support?
There's absolutely been massive signals of support, and in fact, I couldn't praise or sing their praises any higher. Both the IDC and the Development Bank of South Africa had to write off significant investments, into Blue Ridge. But I think one thing they've always stood by is that, the finance is one thing, but it's actually the job creation and the rural opportunities that are actually more important for them. So through this through this process and the transaction, although they've had to take a few major financial hits, for them the bigger objective was to provide Blue Ridge with the best opportunity to create jobs and some wealth in that area. So yeah, absolutely. I think they've been hugely supportive of what we're up to. The IDC is already one of our stakeholders. We've got an extremely close relationship with them. And again, our mandates are actually very similar. And we see ourselves as a listed counterparty that can help them to tackle a couple of the projects that may be in financial distress.
So perhaps the first of many. Well, shareholders were so-so on that one. The share price down about 4% today. As far as the other two companies that we've spoken about today, their share prices on Attack and Equites were both up about 0.75%. Well, as promised, if you've been dallying in the crypto markets, SARS is coming for you. Hopefully, you're one of the 10% of South Africans who have disclosed that their profits or indeed their trading in crypto. If you aren't, if you're part of the 90%, best you get your house in order. There is a voluntary disclosure program that SARS has opened up. It's probably got your name already, even if you have been trading outside of the country. And we found out all of this from Bernard Kruger, who's a senior manager at the South African Revenue Services. That full interview is on BizNews TV, but here's a highlight.
We can raise penalties up to 200% if you didn't declare, which will, so that would be your, the penalty of the capital amount. So it's quite hefty.
It's very onerous indeed. And from here onwards, how much attention are you going to be giving to the crypto area? The taxman's got a wide remit.
We've got some measures already in place. So some of it is sending out compliance letters to taxpayers with high-risk transactions. In the next few months, we would then increase this. We also have a unit that focuses on audits of crypto assets, and we're busy implementing or busy expanding that resources. We advertise some positions, and we will soon appoint some additional auditors to assist with this task. I think that like I earlier mentioned, the best practices that came from other authorities, focusing on awareness and education, that is important. SARS is working on some guidance documents, which will then guide taxpayers exactly how to determine the taxability of crypto assets, and that will be published when approved.
So if I can just to summarize, you do get the information from the crypto exchanges, not just in South Africa, but you might have access to them overseas as well.
That's correct. We've already received some information from other authorities. So you're right in your summary. We request information from the crypto asset exchanges. We're working with the FSCA to get some information from them as well. And like you said, from other tax authorities, we get information from them.
And are you sitting on a naughty list? In other words, are you sitting on a list of people who have contravened regulations, but you're giving them a warning? Is that the reason for issuing the statement as you did this week, just to almost give people a last chance?
Exactly. So we've got information. We're working on a model where we can track the compliance of people that do crypto asset transactions. And you're right. I mean, this just to encourage people, and that's why we issued the statement earlier this week, is that to say, listen, you have opportunity. If you're not compliant, please make use of the voluntary disclosure program. Like I say, as we're expanding our auditors, the number of auditors that's going to work on this, and if you don't do it now, we will audit you, and like the penalties is going to be much higher as it going through the voluntary disclosure program.
200% fine. Sure. And some people are going to be listening to this and saying, oh, well, SARS are just trying to scare us into complying. I don't know. I like to sleep at night. I'm Alec Hogg. This is the last episode of the BizNews Briefing for the week. We'll be back on Monday. Until then, cheerio.